My name is Hannah Carter. I'm 33 years old, and if you had asked me a year ago what kind of wife I was, I would have said I was loyal, patient, and the kind of woman who believed love could survive hard times. I believed that because I had to. My husband Ethan and I had been married for 4 years. We lived in a small house outside Denver, in a quiet neighborhood with trimmed lawns, barking dogs, and couples who waved at each other from their driveways. From the outside, our life looked normal. I worked at a dental office, Ethan worked in sales, and every Sunday I made pancakes while he drank coffee and scrolled through his phone. At least, that was how it used to be. Somewhere along the way, Ethan changed. Or maybe he had always been changing, and I was too busy loving him to notice. He started coming home later from work. When I asked how his day was, he would say, "Long," and disappear into the shower. At dinner, he barely looked up from his plate. At night, he lay beside me in bed with his phone glowing against his face, typing fast and turning the screen away without thinking I would notice. I noticed everything. I noticed how he no longer reached for my hand at the grocery store. I noticed how he forgot the little things I said, like my dentist appointment, or the fact that my sister was coming to town. I noticed how every conversation somehow ended with him rubbing his forehead and saying, "Hannah, I'm just stressed, okay?" And every time I told myself the same thing. Marriage has hard seasons. People get tired. Love means staying. So I stayed. I smiled when I wanted to cry. I made his favorite pasta on Fridays. I asked if he wanted to watch a movie with me, even when I already knew he would say he was too tired. I kept trying to reach him, even when it felt like he was standing on the other side of a locked door. Then, one Tuesday evening in early October, Ethan came home carrying takeout and a look on his face I hadn't seen in months. He smiled. Not a polite smile, a real one. "Pack a bag for the weekend," he said, setting the food on the kitchen counter. "I booked us a trip." I stared at him. "A trip?" He nodded. "Just us. 3 days at a lake cabin. We need a break." For a second, I couldn't speak. My chest felt tight, but in a good way. Like something inside me had finally taken a full breath after months of holding it in. "A real trip?" I asked, almost laughing. Ethan walked over and kissed the top of my head. "Yes, Hannah, a real trip." That night, after he fell asleep, I lay awake staring at the ceiling with tears in my eyes. Maybe this was it. Maybe this was our chance to fix things. I pictured the two of us sitting by the lake with coffee in our hands, talking honestly for the first time in months. I imagined us taking long walks, laughing again, remembering who we used to be before bills and stress and silence moved into our marriage. I imagined Ethan looking at me the way he used to, like I was still the best part of his life. For the first time in a long time, I let myself feel hopeful. The next few days, I threw myself into the trip like it meant everything, because to me, it did. I bought a soft cream-colored sweater for the cold mornings by the water. I got my nails done, something I hadn't bothered doing in months. I even took Friday off work and told my coworkers, with a smile I could barely hide, that my husband was surprising me with a romantic weekend. I wanted this trip to save us. The night before we left, Ethan was in the garage taking a work call when I remembered I still needed to print the cabin address and reservation details. His laptop was open on the dining table, so I sat down and pulled up his email. I found the booking confirmation almost right away. My eyes moved over the dates, the cabin address, and the check-in time. Then I saw the names on the reservation: Ethan Carter, Hannah Carter, and Olivia Mason. I froze. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I blinked hard and leaned closer to the screen, but the name didn't change. Olivia Mason, Ethan's ex-girlfriend, the woman he dated for 6 years before me. My hands started shaking so badly, I nearly dropped the paper I was holding. My stomach twisted, and suddenly I couldn't breathe right. It felt like the room had tilted under me. I heard the garage door open behind me. "Hannah?" Ethan said. I turned slowly, still staring at the screen. "Why?" I asked, my voice so quiet it barely sounded like mine. "Is Olivia's name on our trip reservation?" His face changed instantly, not with guilt, with annoyance. He walked closer and looked at the screen like it was a small problem, like I had caught a typo instead of something that made my whole body go cold. "Oh," he said, "I was going to tell you." I stood up so fast the chair scraped loudly against the floor. "You were going to tell me that your ex is coming on our trip?" He sighed and rubbed the back of his neck. "It's not what you think." I actually laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Then tell me what I'm supposed to think, Ethan." He looked tired, like I was already exhausting him. "Olivia's been going through a hard time," he said. "Her boyfriend left, she's a mess, and she needed to get out of town for a few days. I was just trying to help." I stared at him in disbelief. "So you invited your ex-girlfriend on our marriage trip?" "It's not a marriage trip," he snapped. "It's just a weekend away." My heart dropped. A weekend away. That was all it was to him. Not a chance to fix us. Not a chance to reconnect. Not a chance to save the thing I had been trying so hard to hold together. Just a weekend away. And somehow, in Ethan's mind, there was room for Olivia in it too. I should have refused to go. Even now, when I think back to that night, I ask myself why I still packed my bag, why I still got into Ethan's car the next morning, and why I let him drive me 3 hours into the mountains like nothing had broken between us. But the truth is, part of me still wanted to believe him. After our fight, Ethan spent half the night telling me I was making the situation bigger than it was. He said Olivia was only coming because she needed a quiet place to think. He said she would stay in a separate room. He said I was his wife, and that should be enough for me to trust him. And maybe that was my problem. I kept accepting the smallest pieces of love and calling them enough. So the next morning, I sat in the passenger seat while Ethan drove us toward the lake. The sky was gray and the roads were wet from last night's rain. I stared out the window most of the time, watching pine trees blur past us while the radio played softly in the background. Ethan acted almost normal. He stopped for coffee, asked if I wanted a muffin, and even rested one hand on my knee for a few minutes, like we were still the kind of couple who could be fixed by a weekend away. I wanted to pull away. Instead, I stayed quiet. When we finally reached the cabin, my stomach tightened before I even got out of the car. It sat near the edge of the lake, surrounded by tall trees and cold autumn air. It should have been beautiful, the kind of place where couples took pictures by the fireplace and came home feeling closer than before. But all I could see was the woman standing on the porch, Olivia. She was wrapped in a long beige coat, her dark hair loose around her shoulders, one hand holding a coffee mug. She looked comfortable, like she had been there for a while, like she belonged there. The moment Ethan parked, she smiled and walked down the steps. "Hannah," she said warmly, as if we were old friends, "I'm really glad you still came." I forced a tight smile, but my eyes moved to Ethan. Still came. So he had told her I didn't want to come. He had told her about our fight. He had taken my pain and turned it into a conversation with his ex. Before I could say anything, Ethan grabbed our bags from the trunk and said, "Come on, let's get inside. It's freezing out here." Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled like wood and cinnamon candles. There was a stone fireplace in the living room, a big leather couch, and a wall of windows facing the lake. It was exactly the kind of place I would have loved if I hadn't felt like I was walking into someone else's memory. Olivia had already settled in. Her sweater was draped over one of the kitchen chairs. A paperback book sat on the coffee table, beside a half-finished cup of tea. There was even a pair of her shoes by the front door. I stood there holding my overnight bag and felt something ugly twist in my chest. This wasn't our trip anymore. It was theirs, and I was just the woman awkwardly standing in the middle of it. The first few hours were painful in ways I hadn't expected. Olivia kept acting sweet and harmless, which somehow made it worse. "I hope this isn't too weird," she said, while we unpacked groceries in the kitchen. "Ethan said you're really understanding." I nearly dropped the carton of eggs in my hand. Understanding? That was the word he had used for me. Not hurt, not shocked, not humiliated. Understanding. I swallowed hard and forced myself to say, "I guess he gives me too much credit." Olivia laughed softly like I had made a joke. The rest of the afternoon felt like watching a movie I didn't belong in. Ethan and Olivia slipped into conversation so easily it made my chest ache. They talked about college friends, old road trips, and restaurants they used to love. They laughed at stories I had never heard before, finished each other's sentences, and remembered tiny details from years ago like no time had passed at all. I sat on the couch beside them, smiling when I was supposed to smile, but inside I felt smaller and smaller. At one point, Olivia mentioned a little diner near Boulder, and Ethan laughed. "You used to order pancakes at midnight," he said. "With extra strawberries," she said. "And whipped cream," Ethan added. They both laughed. I looked down at my hands. Ethan couldn't even remember how I took my coffee. Later that evening, we went for a walk by the lake before dinner. The air was sharp and cold, and the wind cut through my sweater. I stayed a few steps behind them, listening as Olivia talked about her breakup, and Ethan nodded with that soft, patient expression he hadn't given me in months. Then Olivia shivered. Without hesitation, Ethan took off his jacket and draped it around her shoulders. I stopped walking. He didn't even look back at me. And in that moment, standing by the freezing lake with my husband's back turned toward me, I understood something I had been trying not to see. I wasn't the center of Ethan's world anymore. Maybe I hadn't been for a long time. That night, I barely touched my dinner. Olivia sat across from Ethan at the small wooden table by the kitchen window, and the two of them talked like I wasn't even there. She told a story about an old apartment she used to live in, and Ethan laughed so hard he nearly spilled his drink. I watched his face in the soft yellow light above the table and felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't remember the last time I had made him laugh like that. When dinner was over, Olivia offered to wash the dishes, but Ethan stood up right away. "I'll help," he said. Of course he would. I took my glass of water and went upstairs to the bedroom Ethan and I were supposed to share. I changed into my pajamas, washed my face, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the wall. I could hear their voices downstairs. Low, comfortable, familiar. Every laugh from the kitchen felt like a door closing somewhere inside me. When Ethan finally came upstairs, I was already under the blankets, pretending to be asleep. He moved quietly around the room, changed clothes, and got into bed beside me without saying a word. I lay there in the dark, my body stiff, my eyes open. At some point, I must have drifted off. But sometime after midnight, I woke up to silence. The space beside me was empty. I sat up immediately. The bathroom light was off. The bedroom door was slightly open. My heart began to pound before I even stood up, like some part of me already knew what I was about to find. I wrapped a blanket around my shoulders and walked downstairs as quietly as I could. The cabin was dark, except for the soft glow of the back porch light shining through the glass doors. That's where they were. Ethan and Olivia sat together on the porch swing, facing the lake, wrapped in the same blanket. Olivia's head was resting on his shoulder. Ethan's arm was around her. I froze in the hallway, hidden by the shadows. Olivia was crying. "I never thought I'd lose you forever," she whispered. My breath caught. Ethan didn't answer right away. He just held her closer. Then she said in a broken voice, "I made a mistake when I let you go." The world seemed to stop. I waited for Ethan to pull away, to remind her that he was married, to tell her she was crossing a line. But he didn't. He just sat there in silence, holding her while she cried. And somehow, that silence hurt more than any lie he could have told me. I went back upstairs before they saw me. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely close the bedroom door. I sat on the floor beside the bed with my back against the mattress and pressed my hand over my mouth to keep from making a sound. I didn't cry right away. At first, I just felt numb. I thought about all the times Ethan had told me not to worry about Olivia. All the times he said they were just old friends. All the times I had swallowed my discomfort because I didn't want to seem insecure or dramatic. I had been trying to save a marriage that Ethan was quietly sharing with someone else. By morning, I felt hollow. Ethan was in the kitchen making coffee when I came downstairs. Olivia was nowhere in sight. He looked up, smiled faintly, and said, "Morning." I stared at him across the room. "We need to talk." Something in my voice must have warned him, because the smile disappeared immediately. He followed me out to the back deck. The air was freezing, but I barely felt it. "I saw you last night," I said. Ethan's face went still. Saw what? I looked at him in disbelief. Don't do that. Don't insult me by pretending you don't know what I mean. He rubbed a hand over his jaw and looked away. I saw you with Olivia, I said, my voice shaking now. I saw her in your arms. I heard what she said. He stayed silent. That was all the answer I needed, but I kept going anyway because once the pain starts coming out, it doesn't stop politely. Tell me the truth, Ethan, I whispered. Am I your wife, or am I just the woman who stayed after she left? His eyes snapped back to mine. Hannah! No. I stepped back before he could touch me. I need the truth, not another excuse, not another speech about me overreacting, the truth. For a long moment, he just stood there, looking tired and cornered, and nothing like the man I had married. Then he finally said it. I didn't mean for this to happen. I laughed bitterly. That's not the truth. That's the beginning of an apology. He closed his eyes for a second. Olivia reached out a few months ago, after her breakup. A few months ago. I felt my stomach twist. We started talking, he continued. At first it was just checking in. Then it became more. She was having a hard time and I didn't want to abandon her. You didn't want to abandon her, I repeated softly. But hurting me was fine? His face tightened. It wasn't like that. Then what was it like? He looked out at the lake instead of at me, and then he said the words that broke whatever was left inside me. I thought this trip might help me figure out what I'm feeling. I stared at him. I actually stopped breathing for a second. You brought me here, I said slowly, so you could decide between your wife and your ex? Ethan didn't answer. He didn't have to. Because in that moment, I knew. This trip was never meant to save our marriage. It was meant to test whether he still wanted it. I don't remember walking back into the cabin. I only remember the sound of my own heartbeat and the strange numbness in my hands as I climbed the stairs. Ethan followed me, calling my name, trying to explain, but his voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone I used to know. I went straight into the bedroom and pulled my suitcase onto the bed. Hannah, please, Ethan said from the doorway. Don't do this. I turned around so fast my eyes filled with tears. Don't do this, I repeated. You brought me on this trip so you could decide whether you still wanted your ex, and you're telling me not to do this? He stepped into the room. It's more complicated than that. No, I said, my voice shaking. It's actually very simple. I'm your wife, Ethan. I was supposed to be the person you protected, the person you respected, the person you chose. But instead, you brought another woman into our marriage and expected me to smile through it. His face crumpled. I never wanted to hurt you. I folded one of my sweaters with trembling hands and shoved it into my suitcase. That doesn't matter anymore. It does matter. No, I said again, louder this time. What matters is that you did hurt me. You lied to me. You let me think this trip was about us, when really it was about you trying to figure out whether your past mattered more than your marriage. He reached for my arm, but I pulled away before he could touch me. Don't, I whispered. For a second, we just stood there, staring at each other. Ethan looked desperate, broken even. But all I could think was how unfair it was that he got to look heartbroken now, after I had spent months feeling alone in my own marriage. "I loved you," I said, and my voice cracked on the words. "I loved you enough to keep forgiving things I shouldn't have forgiven. I kept telling myself you were stressed, or tired, or going through something. I kept making excuses because I didn't want to believe the truth." Ethan swallowed hard. "Hannah!" "The truth," I said, zipping up my suitcase, "is that I was fighting for a marriage you had already opened the door on." He had no answer for that. I carried my suitcase downstairs, my legs shaking with every step. Olivia was standing near the fireplace, her face pale, like she already knew everything. "Hannah," she said softly, "I'm sorry." I looked at her, and for the first time that weekend, I saw her clearly, not as some perfect ghost from Ethan's past, but as a woman who had stepped into a place that was never hers to take. Maybe she was hurting too. Maybe she had her own regrets. But I had nothing left to give either of them. "You should be," I said quietly. Then I walked out. The drive home was a blur of tears and silence. I pulled over twice because I couldn't see the road through my crying. Ethan called me over and over again, but I let the phone ring until it finally stopped. By the time I got home, the sun was going down. The house felt colder than usual when I walked in, like it already knew something had ended. I packed another bag that night and drove to my older sister Claire's apartment across town. When she opened the door and saw my face, she didn't ask questions. She just pulled me into her arms and held me while I cried so hard I could barely breathe. Over the next week, Ethan texted constantly, "I'm sorry. Please let me explain. I love you. I'll cut Olivia off. I know I messed up. Please don't give up on us." But every message came too late. A week later, I agreed to meet him at a quiet coffee shop near our house. Ethan looked exhausted, like he hadn't slept. The moment he saw me, his eyes filled with tears. "I know I don't deserve another chance," he said. "But I love you, Hannah. I was confused. I was stupid. I let the past pull me in, and I almost lost the best thing in my life." I listened quietly, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee I didn't want. Then I looked at him and said the words I had spent days learning how to believe. "I think you did lose it." He flinched like I had slapped him. Tears burned in my eyes, but I didn't look away. "I wanted that trip to save our marriage," I said. "But all it did was show me the truth. A woman should never have to compete for a place in her own marriage. She should never have to beg her husband to choose her." Ethan covered his face with his hands. "Please." I stood up slowly, my legs weak but steady enough. "I loved you," I said, "but love without honesty, without loyalty, without respect, it isn't enough. And I finally know I deserve more than being someone's second choice." I left the coffee shop with tears running down my face, but for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel lost. I felt free. 3 months later, I filed for divorce. It was painful. Some days it still is. But pain is different when it's healing instead of breaking you. Sometimes I think about that trip and how badly I wanted it to save my marriage. But now I understand something I couldn't see then. It did save something. It saved me. My husband took his ex on our trip, and in the end, He lost the woman who had loved him through every silence, every excuse, and every lie. And I learned that being alone hurts far less than staying with someone who makes you feel alone while standing right beside you.